Welcome back to another episode of our complete-ish course construction series, and in this one we're going to look at a different section of the plot entirely because I'm not totally sold on these three and I'd kind of like to get started on one of them. We've finished up 16 since you last were here. All that's really required is a little bit more people planting down here, grass planting under here, fleshing out a few more bits back here as well, and that's really all that I've done. The only other thing I then went and did, there was one bit of 3 that was really bugging me, which was how the coastline cut in way short here. And I think this is an important point with like minimalism. So the plot that I made, you can see the single brush moves. Just I haphazardly created the coastline and routed the plot around it, the course around it. Now, whilst minimalism might say that, oh well, you've got to keep those moves, you can't forget that those were pretty random moves to begin with, and they're not really mirroring how the land would be in real life. So I had this little indentation here and this one here, which is part of why I stuck the green out on the point. But the land cutting in like this and then going out was looking really awkward and like I'd manufactured a point for this. And I didn't really like the visual of how it looked and how it introduced the coastline. This, I think, looks much more natural. I'm still not 100% on the planting down to the left, but if we chuck some crowds in front of it, so we'll chuck them on, I think it works all right. We might thin out a few of the people standing here because they're kind of in the way. But I'm much happier with how that sits now, at least, than I was. I still am toying with lowering the green just a couple of feet because it might make sculpting the green pad a little easier. But that's all I've really done since. So what we're going to look at is this little 8, 9, 15 corridor. 15, I've kind of decided I like the idea. I just don't think this is quite how to do it. So what we're going to do is just get rid of all of this, not including the trees. I kind of like having some trees to work around. And I'm going to lose that. Now I'm going to lose this. There's nothing in there that was like irreplaceable. And then this rough line is purely just marking an angle of sunlight, which I don't need anymore either. So where to start? Well, 9 is the par 3 that I think I need to make the most of, and I need to perch this kind of just above the barranca. So here is a good spot, and I kind of want this to be around 180 odd yards, if I can, although that's a similar distance to 4, but I think we can mitigate that with pins. So front pin on 4, 150, back pin on 4, 185. So somewhere within that sort of range would be about right. So a front pin here, 160 odd, 200. Can stretch it out even more if I need to. Or we can turn it around a little bit more and play this way. That could work nicely. My vision for this par 3 is one that's like, it's got the barranca in front, not necessarily cutting in, but introduces you more to like this sort of back bunkering, cutting out the barranca, and also I think just a cluster of cypress trees around it and kind of merging that bit of the environment. Now, obviously, any further I take this T back, it potentially gets in the way of 15, but let's move it back here for the moment. There we do. Okay, so we're going to look at 8 next. 8, I think, is the one that's got the potential to be the most interesting of the holes, because you're going to have the barranca kind of cutting through the middle of it. And one idea that I have had is whether you kind of cut fairway up to about here and do the barranca splitting the fairway, which is quite an extreme way of doing it compared to some of the other holes that we're going to have. But on this sort of a hole, I could see it working. And also, I don't really mind going for the odd, very extreme hole. That's just because it forces me to do stuff that's memorable and not play too safe. So this one, I was kind of thinking a rough idea might be shallow but quite long green. So you get the angle playing up this way and challenging tree and barranca, which gives you a longer shot in but better angle. Or you play driver kind of over here. Could you carry that? If not, could you carry this? And I mean, I could do out of bounds. I'm not sure I really want to. Immediately, this is feeling like quite a disjointed idea, but one that we could potentially make work with bunkering. I'm not sure. Feels like you might choose to merge the fairways a bit more. Could be an option. So you've got that layup area, then the barranca hits in, and it's just to what extent do you bite that off? And we could always put... Okay, clearing this all out for a moment. You could always have a bunker string kind of cutting out from the barranca, and therefore that often can make the fairway shaping a little bit neater. Or like easier to justify. As for the hole, I like that the fairway runs this way once you crest the barranca. Like, that's fun. Because that's going to mean that you're exaggerating any angle. If you hit driver over here, you are ending up down here. Whereas you could play your 3-wood down to here and get an angle that's straight at the green. One other option. This one would need very careful management. Kind of lion's mouth sort of green. So if you did hit driver, you're then hitting dead over that bunker. That'd be super precise. If you laid up, better option. Lay back to here, front pin, driver to here. We can make front pin challenging by just bringing another bunker in about here, probably. As an idea, I would say this one has potential. It's just going to be need to be very carefully managed. I'm more hitting LACC vibes, which is no bad thing, given that that brings barranca and funky green shapes into play a little bit more. So how would we defend against this angle from a different pin? Because that's definitely not the best angle for this one. I can see this working. Probably have another bunker cutting in somewhere around about here. And then you could have trees around that sort of area. I think that would definitely be a memorable golf hole. I'm wondering whether this still stays just barranca or if you do bunker it. I kind of like the idea of just making it a barranca. Or, could even, it's only 6 feet, could even put fairway over it. Like, do you want that really hanging lie, or do you want to just crest it and get up here? Could work. Just cut in a little bit, maybe. Okay, what we're going to do, I think I'm going to hit save just because I quite like where this is going. It feels out there, but you're just going to have played. So one is what I always quite like to do when I'm hitting any sort of hole idea like this is think about whether it fits and what's the flow of holes. So one is going to be kind of a, for lack of a better word, kind of a standard pebble hole. It's got a small green surrounded by bunkers, hitting a wedge shot to an elevated green. There's not, right, it will be a good setting. It will be a solid opener. Any other hole on the course, I think it's maybe a little bit of a letdown. perhaps, or a breather hole. But I think for an opening hole, that can work quite nicely, and we can make the bunkering nice and dramatic. So I'm quite happy with that for getting us up here. 2, again, it's like a not a gentle introduction, but the tee shot's introducing the barranca, you're hitting over it. And then it's just getting that angle and hitting a downhill running shot, basically. 3, we hit the coastline, downhill pitch shot, front to back green. 4, very dramatic par 3. 5, hitting over hogs back, perched green. 6, very dramatic par 3. 7, trouble right. So you've had 4 really dramatic holes in a row. So a change of pace to something more strategic and like works quite nicely. 8, you're coming back to the barranca. So it's how do we make that really visible, I guess. I mean, it's bringing you back to this. You're then going to see it again on 9, and you'll have seen it already on 2, 3, gone away from it for a bit, come back to it for a bit. Won't be on 10, won't be on 11. 12, 13, 14, will be a bit on 15, will be on 16. So it kind of, you cycle back to it kind of when you're not at the cliffs. The only 2 holes that don't feature either barranca or cliffs, there's 3 of them, 4 of them. 1 doesn't feature them. 10, 11, which I think are quite good for like some more standard holes. Like you've had a lot going on between 2 and 10, 9. So it's quite nice to have a little bit of a more standard, for lack of a better word. But even then, I might rip up 10 and do something different anyway. And then the only other one will be 17, and even then, that's got a big cliff view in the backdrop. It just doesn't sit right on them. Okay. I can potentially get behind this. So what we're going to do is just pop down a couple of greens blinds and just see how the ball reacts. There's one thing having this idea in your head, it's another actually knowing that it works. Immediately this green feels too big. That's fine, we can work with that. I'm not going to be overly precise with this. We're going to start with having fairway pretty much everywhere. Fairway out here a little bit more. We could go out of bounds down here, but it would feel unnecessary. And it would really only be punishing people who really block a drive and therefore are pretty way out anyway. Okay. Have a look at how this works. So it's 18 feet up, but the land movement feels, well, the land movement needs some work at the moment. The way it really falls off to the left is odd, and the way this is really high is odd. So that's interesting to know. You can see 16 off in the background down there. I do like this view for 15. Hitting a drive down here and seeing those crowds and the map backdrop and the nice openness I really like. So it's really the 8th corridor that needs a bit of work. So you'd hit driver there. Yeah, green's way too big. He probably needs to be pushed up a little bit. It's like, I would want you to be, well, I guess if you come, so you can definitely run through the other side. Green's way too big. Good to know. Okay, so what we can do is keep the same sort of idea, but definitely needs to be shorter as a whole, which is good. 334. I guess that's direct line, isn't it? I mean, that's potentially interesting if people think they can drive and get near there. But fun spin on it. Way too wide. Okay. So at this point, we have our idea, I think, and I'll flesh it out. And even if it doesn't go quite where I'd want it to, I think it's still worth keeping. Let's keep. Actually, bring a bunker there. Will work better, I think. Okay, so now what you're going to get to see is a little bit of time-lapse stuff again, and just an idea of redoing ideas and refining them, because we've agreed that this is too big. Partly that's because I have this at 38 and I've gone way beyond it for some reason. It was a slightly rushed screen, but yeah, we can go through it and try and refine a bit now. Enjoy. Okay, so that's the time lapse of this part of it done. Now you'll have seen some different things going on. First one was moving the trees around and checking the lighting. We don't want this green in shadow, and we don't want to realise that too late. So that was one major thing. The second bit was kind of planning out the barranca and making it all make a bit more sense. Now, when swinging the lighting around, I actually decided I really like the corridor 15 sits on. Like, that's some very cool, dramatic land. And this area of the plot's got a lot of fun stuff going on. It is very different to the coastal stuff. And I like that there's this dip and then it rises back up out of it. Like, this kind of area of coastline has some really random and fun land movement. You only have to look at some of the LA courses. It's a slightly different site, but I'm happy to pull from that a little bit as well. Um, as for this one, well, I liked the idea of a green perched over the barranca, and kind of thinking about LACC got me looking at, like, that's where the lion's mouth green sort of comes from. Thomas does this a fair bit, and that links nicely with this as an idea. We've got the option of driving it down into this kind of part of the fairway, and that's where the land movement gets a little bit more random. So I'm going to play with that a bit more and kind of slopes and stances and things like that. You do have this little elbow of fairway, which we'll have to be careful with how we cut the barranca in, because that can be really difficult to manage. Kind of like the framing bunkers off the tee. Don't know if we need them at all, but I feel like it needs something visually. But that'll be one where we deliberate about it. Especially as I believe seven's not going to have any fairway bunkers. I don't think it's just purely going to be cliffside. Five has minimal. We've done quite a lot of like just land movement, and I think this one maybe needs a little bit more. And then the green itself, I started out with a very small shape, but I kind of have had quite a lot of the smaller greens, and I want to go with variety. So I extended it out and put a second green surface down. One trick I quite like to use, if you're never sure on whether a green or a texture works, put another green down, and you can always just switch it back to heavy rough, and then you see where your original one was. I felt this just became a bit too target golf, whereas I think if I put a bit more depth in, then I can have a higher back plateau and or a lower back plateau depending on how I want to work it, which then gives you, I think, probably high, because that then means if you do end up on this part of the green, you can putt off a ridge to get yourself close to this hole rather than having to chip over it, which I always feels a bit awkward. And I like the green also extending out and back into the barranca as well. We can dig a bunker in towards this bit, so that makes that shot interesting too. Then also started looking at 9 and shadows and things for that. I think probably will revert back to this area. Have the barranca kind of in front, but really just bunker framing around it and kind of a copse of trees. But you'll see that on 8 as well, which I think will look quite nice, and you get a view over 15 too. So I think this will tie this area in pretty nicely. What I'll probably do next is just spend a bit more time tidying this up on a time lapse in the next episode, and see where we go from there. But yeah, like this one. See you then.